Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. Guys, I'm really excited about tonight's podcast. I've got Robert with me, and Robert has had several Class B and one Class A encounter with Bigfoot over the years. He started researching this creature at a very young age, and one of the reasons I'm really excited about tonight's podcast is he's compiled together a ton of different encounters that have happened in my home state of Arkansas. He's from Arkansas and has really devoted the last 10 years of his life doing this, and we're going to get into a lot of those encounters and his story. Really interesting stuff. You don't want to miss this episode. But before I do, I just want to say thank you for being here. I really do appreciate all the support. If you've got a mystery you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. But let's jump right in the story. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. I know you've got a lifelong relationship with these creatures. So why don't you start at the very beginning when you heard about the Fouke monster and got your interest in that, and kind of walk us through your encounters.
Okay. Well, when I was I've always been interested in this, but when I was a junior in high school, I'd seen the Legend of Boggy Creek, and I had a paper to do in school, and I had to find sources, but I also had to interview people for it. And I called and finally found the right Crabtree, and I interviewed Smokey Crabtree for this paper, and he invited me to come down to Fouke. And so on my that's my junior year, and during the spring break, I went down there to do a few days of Bigfoot investigations. I did, and so I met Smokey, and he took me around all these places, and he showed me where if I wanted to see one of these things, this would probably be a really good spot to camp. And so I set up my camp, and that night, noises in the swamp were almost deafening, but every noise was something that was going to come and eat me. It scared myself silly. I wound up abandoning my campsite and sleeping the rest of the night in the parking lot of the Monster Mart. And I was thinking, well, this going out in the woods and looking for this thing, maybe not for me. So I became an armchair squatcher, watched all the movies, read all the books, and until I had an experience with some rock clacking with my son. It wasn't even a research; it was just a father-son campout, and it was at the White River Wildlife Management Area below Helena, there close to the Mississippi. And I was wondering, well, where are they getting rocks to clack together? And so I listened to that for about 45 minutes that night. And the next day we drove out, and sure enough, there was piles of rocks where they were going to fix the road on the levee there. And I said, well, there's rocks right there. And so it started getting me thinking, well, what has hands that could pick these rocks up and strike them together? So I thought there must be something out there, and it kind of intrigued me to get back in to Bigfooting. And I went to a couple of conferences, went to the Texas conference when it was held at Jefferson and all, and met some people. And we organized a little group called Arkansas Primate Evidence Society. We're just big apes in the woods. And we researched in the central Arkansas area. We did go down to Fouke some, but mainly in this central part of the state. And we've cast footprints, got a lot of audio, and two of my members had sightings. I had searched for this thing for 11 years before I had my first sighting, and it was in eastern Oklahoma. But I think I've been close to these things several times. The smell, uh, the noises, something rubbing on my tent, a handprint on my hood of the car that was right next to my tent, and one time something tried to get in the car with me, and that was pretty scary when I was sleeping in the car. I did have a clear daylight sighting when something walked across the road in front of me, about 100 feet in front of my car. And so I went from a believer to a knower right then and there, because it couldn't have been anything else. It was just massive on two legs. my sighting was in 2018, and so this was about I think it was the year after I had my sighting, I believe. And I have been invited for several years to be a speaker at the Oklahoma Bigfoot Symposium in Stillwell, Oklahoma, by the MABRC. They're good guys. I'm not a member, but I consider them brothers just about. And they invited me down, and I spoke. But I had an opportunity to stay an extra 2 days after the symposium. Everybody else left, and I like the symposium a lot because most of the time. Uh, the speakers go camping. We don't get a hotel. We go camping, and so during the day we talk Bigfoot, and then at night we do a little bit of squatching. And so I like that. And so everybody else had to go back to work, and because of my ability to stay, there was only one other guy that was going to stay, and he. We went down to the river. It was November. It was cold. It was rainy, and I hate to set up a wet tent, and so if it's raining, I'll sleep in my car, and that's what I was doing. And I was wrapped up in a gray blanket behind the wheel, and he was about 150 feet away in his pickup. Uh, and after this event, I called him on his phone and woke him up, so I knew it wasn't him, and uh, I was asleep, and something woke me up. And you know that just few seconds where you're kind of disoriented and trying to get a clear head. I was in that state right there and noticed that my car was rocking from side to side, not a lot, but just some. And I was saying, what's going on? And about that time, I distinctly heard the handle on the passenger door fall back into place. Something had lifted it up and let go of it, and it fell back into place. I was so glad that I had my doors locked. and it was foggy outside. It was rainy, and I didn't see anything. But that experience of the car moving, and that door handle, I knew something was trying to get in. And for a long time, I didn't have a firearm, and I finally got one few years before this, and that was the first time I ever reached for my gun, squatching. And I had it on the dash, and when I moved inside the car and reached it, I guess it realized that I was there because I'd been wrapped up in that blanket, and I could hear it run away on 2 feet on the gravel road that we were on, and it really shook me up. The next day, I got up, looked for footprints, but it was gravel. I didn't see any footprints. The I looked on the passenger side, and the rear view mirror had been pushed in all of the way. So something had come up on that side of the car and tried to get in the door there. Um, Earlier that day, I had put out a couple of bananas, and there were like three bananas, and I went over there, and two of the bananas were completely gone. One banana peel was, you know how we just peel it back. It, this thing had opened it from the side, and like you would open some peas in a pod, and part of the banana was chewed up and dropped on the ground. The other part of it was gone, and so I still have in the freezer. I still have that chewed up banana. Don't know if it's evidence or not, but I got a chewed up banana, and I won't let my wife throw it away. So, and so that's really what happened that time. Really, it's really unsettling to think that something could have been in the car with me, uh, or at least reaching in like that, had I not had my doors unlocked. But these things have watched us, and they know that if they maneuver that little thing there, a door opens, and inside is where the cookies are. And so I'm sure that's what he was looking for. And so that's that story. Did I see anything? No. Did I have a close encounter? I think I did.
I agree with you, man. Like That's pretty common behavior for these things to try to do that. They get two things I know, man, is they get really curious and then they're extremely territorial. That's pretty scary to be alone at night, be woken up that way. And I think there's a sense of fear that comes along with that. Your body will wake up, when something's not right. And I think you're pretty fortunate that you had those doors locked, man, because who knows what could have happened.
The car may not have rocked if the doors were open. Just that door open, and he would have been right there. That would have been very scary. I always wanted a siding, but I didn't want the siding to be inside my car with me. So
No, that's about as close as you could get with one of these creatures. There's not much room in a car. I don't blame you for that. Why don't you tell us and break down this second encounter or your Class A encounter that you had?
okay, second encounter was about a half a mile from that experience. Again, we were. It was before the symposium. People had started to gather at this camping site that we had, and when I got there, I realized, man, there's going to be way too many people at this campsite. There's, things are going to just avoid that big of group. So me and two other guys decided we were going to camp uh, a little ways away from that. So maybe something would be curious and come into a smaller group because a big group is intimidating. And so we moved our stuff. And when I got over there to the new place, I realized that I'd forgotten my camp chair because I had it out because we were visiting for a while. And so I just hopped in my car, and it was about 5 in the afternoon. Uh, it was still daylight, but the shadows were starting to get long, if you know what I mean. And so I drove down the asphalt road and turned off onto the gravel road to where the big camp was. And I went a little ways, and then I noticed something standing on the right side of the road from me, and it was in the process of turning away from me towards the other side of the road, and it had started to take one step already. And this thing was um, uh, it was bent over, and it reminded me of like a linebacker that has a football and how they are going to face the tackle, and so they're down and they've got their arms and the football close to their chest. This thing had its arms close to its chest, and it was bent over. I don't know uh, if it was carrying something or trying to make itself look small. Maybe it had an infant. Maybe it had its next meal in its hands. I don't know, but it was bent over, and it took one step, two step, and the third step was close to the trees, and it was gone. When I did it, it took me 8 steps to get across the road. So this thing was big, and it was about the color of a grayish, dirty brown, and it reminded me of like a pine tree bark that's not wet. That dry, that uh, grayish brown color. And I had always talked about. I'd read about how Roger Patterson had practiced reaching back to his saddlebags and grabbing the camera. He had practiced that, and so maybe that was one of the reasons we have the image of Patty that we do. But I told myself, if I ever see something in the road, I'm going to gun my car and get as close as I can to it. But as soon as I saw it, I hit my brakes, you know and so I watched it go across, and then I drove up to where it went across, and I could hear brush popping to the side that it went to. Now the right side that it was standing on, there was a metal farm gate, and there was a pasture land. So I caught it on an exposed side. The other side, towards the river, was all trees. So it had made its way to the trees, and it was getting away that direction. And so I got back in my car, and I went down to get my chair. And when I got out of the car, I was kind of quiet, and one of the guys around the campfire said, "Man, you look like you saw a ghost." And I said, "Well, I saw something." And my mind was just racing. Was it a horse? Was it a cow? Was it a deer? Was it a bear? Was it another person? Was it? And it could be anything. And so I told one or two people about it. And the next day, a friend of mine, Big Jim Whitehead, if you haven't had him on your show, you need to have Big Jim on. He is a senior member, researcher for the MABRC. He is uh, he is an extraordinary tracker in the field. He is a Choctaw native, and his family has taught him to look for things in the woods that we would totally overlook. And he doesn't look for footprints; he looks for disturbance in the leaf clutter. He says, and so we went back the next morning, he and I, and he's called Big Jim for a reason. You know, he's about 6'3", 6'4", maybe close to 400 pounds. You know, to a big guy. And I parked my car where I had stopped, and I had him down by that gate, and I had him bend over and walk across the road, and it just astounded me at the size difference between Big Jim and this thing. When it was bent over, it was still taller than he was standing straight up. It had to have been 9 inches. I mean 9 feet, 9 feet tall. And I took some photographs of him walking across. And one of the sad things when I had my sighting, we had just really gotten there and I had all my equipment still in the car. And on my dash, I had a GoPro camera that had not set up yet, and I could have had a great video had I had that going. It almost made me sick at my stomach thinking about that. But I took photographs of Jim going across, and then we went up there and we were talking about what happened, and he said, "Well, there's a footprint right there." And so sure enough, we were able to cast a footprint that was 18 and a half inches long, and at the toe splay, and you can see the toe splay was 11 inches wide. It was just a huge animal that I caught, just dumb luck. Out of 11 years, that's my only sighting, and I had to be in the daytime, had to be where I couldn't miss it at all. And so that was my sighting, and the saga continues because I started thinking about it. In the real world, I'm a minister of the gospel, and I preach for a living, and we've done a lot of mission work overseas and all of that, and that's really important for me. And the people in the congregation where I preached, they knew that I had an interest in this, and some of them kidded me about it, or somebody says, "Hey, I saw something on TV about Bigfoot," and so they knew that I had an interest, but having an interest and then telling people that you saw something are two different things. Now they have to make a decision, or are they going to believe me or they're going to not believe me? And if they don't believe me, how is that going to change me being a preacher? Are they going to doubt what other things that I say? And so I thought about that all the way home. And that night I was sitting with my wife, and I said, "Mikkel, we can't tell anybody about this. It's going to hurt our family. It's going to hurt my position as a minister. And so let's just keep it quiet." Okay. And so that we decided to do that. The very next weekend was the Paracon in Little Rock at the MacArthur Park. That's always the weekend before Halloween, and for like 11 years, 12 years, I've been the Bigfoot guy. And so I go to that and talk to the UFO people and everybody else, but I'm the Bigfoot guy. And so I it was my turn to speak, and I did my spiel, and I always open it up for question and answer. First arm that came up is, "Have you ever seen one of these things?" And now I'm in a dilemma in front of an audience. Do I lie to them or do I tell the truth? Of course, I told the truth, and I said yes. Second arm came up. "Would you tell us about it?" so I went from telling my wife we can't tell anybody about this, to this whole group hearing about my Bigfoot story. Little did I know that in the audience was a reporter for the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, writing an article about the Paracon, and it came out Sunday morning, front page Sunday morning, and he led off with me talking about my sighting. Now you can't tell me that God doesn't have a sense of humor, because I went from don't tell anybody to the whole state knowing that I had a sighting, and I was really nervous about church, you know, and I didn't say anything about it at all. I had several people come up privately to me and say, "Did you really see something?" And I said, "Yes, I did," and that was good enough for them. All of that worry uh, about them not believing me was in vain. So I was really fortunate there that I had good brothers and sisters in Christ that believe me. So so that's my one and only sighting there.
Robert, that is really an interesting sighting, and the story behind that is really unique, especially with you being a minister. And I can understand how you would think that way. And what are you supposed to do with this stuff? How are you supposed to talk about it? Because, I've discovered, and on this channel, I don't hide my faith at all. I mean, my faith in Christ is very important to me, and I talk about it all the time on this channel. And, there's a lot of things in God's universe we don't understand, right? We can't put it in this box or don't know what to do with it.
I think it's very arrogant of us to think that we know everything too. I like that there's mysteries out there that we don't know about.
Definitely, and that's why I called the channel Mysteries Unknown, because I love mysteries, and there's a lot to unpack there with your sighting. And you're right. Most people think, well, I'm going to snap a picture, I'm going to pull out the camera, and I'm going to get a video. But I think these things are so big, and seeing something that's not supposed to be there, people really don't know how they're going to react. But what was your first initial feeling when you saw this? What's the first thing that came over you?
Well, funny. What raced through my mind at that one point was Paul Freeman in his video when he says, "There he goes." I was thinking, "There he goes," and uh, it had where the camp was next to the river. There is a grove of trees between. Probably about an acre of trees between that encampment and where I saw this thing. I think it was coming down that river and noticed that there was an encampment, and it had circled that encampment and left itself exposed at that spot. And then it got into the trees on the other side and probably went its merry way there. But could it have been? I don't. Could it have been the same one that tried to get in the car with me? I hope not. It sounds like he's got a vendetta against me or something. So there's been multiple sightings there of different ones, even a white one. And now this thing wasn't white, but in my book I find it interesting. One of the things that I did in my book is I took those 1,100 sightings and I crunched the numbers. I asked the questions: who sees a Bigfoot? What were they doing at the time? What time of the day was it? What did they see? How big was it? What color was it? And I ask these questions, and I do percentages. In Arkansas, I think 11 or 12% of all the sightings are of white individuals. I think that's interesting. Are they seeing the one of them? Probably not, because it's spread out across the state. So I thought that was interesting too when you were talking about a white one.
That's really interesting. And for the audience who's catching up, if you've never heard my encounter, before we started to record, me and Robert were talking about my encounter that I had with my wife. We had a white, huge, massive creature on the side of the road, white, shaggy, dirty hair, jump over the hood of my car, and I was going 55 miles an hour. This thing cleared it like it was absolutely nothing. And, the cop in me kicked in at that point, and I regret it now, but me and my wife, we went off through the woods looking for this thing, and I brought my wife with me, and I shouldn't have done that, but I was so, enamored by this thing. And, bringing that up makes me feel better, because I don't hear too many white encounters in Arkansas. I know in different parts of the country, but that's a really unique statistic there. And speaking of your book, this is a good time to transition into that, Robert. I know that you've compiled together these stories, and it's really interesting, but Before we talk about your book, would you mind maybe talking about one encounter that really leaves you puzzled, or maybe something that is just really unique? A lot of times people, when they hear Bigfoot, man, Arkansas is not the first thing come to mind. But I mean, you said how many sightings?
Oh, in my book, over 1,100, and that's just the ones that I could find and know about. There's probably the really good ones are whispered in family groups or friends, and I've never heard of those before. I'm more than willing to put out a second volume if I get some, get people interested in sharing those things with me that I didn't know about in this first book. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's really interesting. But what encounter, what story sticks out to you? Do you have one in mind? I know I put you on the spot, man, but I know the audience would love to hear something from your book.
The sightings are in chronological order, starting in 1832, I think 33, and I'm always intrigued about the early ones, where a guy came to visit his widowed mother, and she was in her bedroom. She had the gun beside her bed. And he said, "Well, what's that for?" He says, "Well, if that big monkey gets in my house again, I'm going to shoot it." And they there's a couple where home invasion is kind of interesting to me. Something was breaking down the front door as the family was leaving the back door to get away from it, and they built a second story onto their house with a big door, a big thick door with a lock, so they could go upstairs and be away from this thing if it ever tried to break in again. So that's just amazing to me. Uh, Back before I-40 cut across the middle of the state, the old highway, old 67, I think it was. A bus driver was uh, that had a whole bunch of passengers stopped, and he ran out into the woods to relieve himself. And he come running back saying, "There's a big monkey out there that tried to get me." And some people looked as he was trying to move the bus along. In the red rear lights, something crossed the road behind them. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting one too. So uh, just there's just so many of them in here. There's one it's in a Arkansas folktale book, but uh, a farmer saw a big monkey sitting on his fence, and he thought it was a escape from the circus, and he ran home and so said to his wife, "Get my gun. The devil is sitting on our fence." And he ran out and he shot it and he killed it. And then the wife said to him, "If that was the devil, you run down and tell the parson that he doesn't have to preach so much since the devil's dead." So, I liked that. I have two from the WPA in the ninth, during the Depression. They did slave narratives, uh, old men and women that had been slaves, and they record their stories. And this one in southwest Arkansas, this one man that had been a slave said he was in charge of the livestock to keep the bears away, and he talked about how he saw a bear picking corn one time, and it came up to a fence, and he had all the ears of corn under its arm, and the bear tossed it over the fence, climbed over the fence, picked up the corn, put it under his arm, and went its way. Now that's not a bear, but back then they may have just said these are odd looking bears. So uh, so that's something that's really intriguing to me too. Things like that.
Well, that's really wild, man. It sounds like a very interesting book, and I'm just when I saw that you wrote a book about my home state of Arkansas and Bigfoot, man, I knew I had to have you on the show. And before we get into where they could buy your book and you can talk more about it, you being for one a minister, I'm very excited to talk to you about this, and two, seeing this creature and being in this world the amount of time that you have, I'm really curious on what you think these things are.
Well, I am a proponent of these being a flesh and blood animal. They are not from UFOs. They are not from other dimensions. I honestly believe that They have to fit the natural laws of this world like any other animal would. So they're flesh and blood. They live in the woods. They don't build houses that we know of. Except maybe something very crude. They eat raw meat. They don't use fire. They don't have a language that we know about, and they poop in the woods. It sounds like an animal to me, and not some higher being from another dimension. I don't think they're forest friends. They don't want to be our friend. 90% or 95% of sightings, when somebody sees it, it's trying to get away from you. And I think they're referred to as nocturnal because we're not nocturnal. We're probably its only enemy out there. It's the apex predator. Anything else in the woods, it's probably not afraid of, but because of our vehicles and our guns, they probably fear us, and they live where we don't go, and they're active at night, and we're not way out in the woods at night. And so we don't see these things until occasionally we bump into one crossing the road, or something coming close at night to get your dog food or your horse feed or something like that you have out. So I think it's a flesh and blood animal. Some people think that it is uh, the Nephilim from the Bible in Genesis. I don't see any evidence of that. When it talks about there in Genesis that there were giants in the world then, that could have been dinosaurs. It could have been anything. You can't really just say, "Oh, they're talking about Bigfoot there." And some people even think that these things are the descendants of Esau, because in the story of Jacob and Esau in Genesis, Esau was a hairy person and had reddish hair, and so they automatically assume, oh well, then that trait has come down and they've become feral and now they're descendants of Esau. I don't think that's the case at all either. When God made Jacob and Esau, he made humans. I don't think this is a human. I think it's an animal. There's too many biological differences. The hands are different. The feet with the mid-tarsal break, that's different. Their size is different. A sagittal crest, that's different. Hair all over its body the way it is, that's different. So there's so many other biological differences between human and man. I don't think this is a human. Uh, is it a hominid? Well, hominid means it walks on 2 feet. So yes, it's a hominid, but that doesn't make it a human. I think it's something else, and it's really good at what it does, and we really don't know what it is. Now, if when one is found and they determine that it's something more than what I believe, well, I'll have to believe that. But until then, I think God made an interesting animal out there, and we just haven't found it yet.
I was really anxious to hear your thoughts on that because, I talked to a lot of people and there's just a wide variety of different thoughts and opinions. And, I think it's one of those things that we can have our own opinions, our own thoughts, but man, we might not ever know, what these things are, but it's interesting to talk about. And I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. And there's a lot of things in God's universe, like I said, we don't understand, but, I just, I love talking about this stuff, and I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. We'll get into a couple other things, but why don't you tell us where they can find your book? Tell us the title of your book and a little bit about it.
I had this database on my computer, and I thought, well, let's just see if it'll go in a book, and that's what I did. And I start with the Native American uh, tribes that were in Arkansas, and what they thought about these things, and then from 1833, I think it is, to 2015, I have 1,100 sightings there. And then I crunched the numbers in the back, like I was telling you, the percentages about the witness and what was seen, and the location, and all of that. So you kind of get an idea as to who are seeing these things, and where you could go to have the most opportunity to see one of these things. And then I have a chapter called of Bones and Bodies, just talking about physical evidence, some things that have been reported in Arkansas, and so I have that. I have a chapter called Bigfoot Survival. Some people say, well, they can't be in Arkansas, but if Arkansas can have bears, Arkansas can have these things. And if they say there's not enough land, there's 19 million acres of mountain and forest and swampland in Arkansas. That's a huge habitat. And also there's a chapter in here that deals with what they can eat. Some people say, "Oh, there's not enough to sustain some of these things." Well, if you can have a bear in an area, you can have a Bigfoot. And then if you say there's not enough food in the forest, tell that to the Native Americans that lived here for centuries before that, and even tell it to our own ancestors during the Depression, where they had to feed off the land. People survived by doing that. These things can do that as well. Of course, I have to mention Boggy Creek, and I talked about the movie and things around Falk. I talk about the Monster Mart, and so there's a chapter about that, and I even have a chapter about other research groups in Arkansas or associated with Arkansas, that in areas where you can get in contact with them. And so I tried to cover everything, even Arkansas in our culture here in the state. There's places where you can go to find big statues people have made of Bigfoot. The um, semi-pro uh, baseball team up around the Fayetteville area, their mascot is Striker, the Sasquatch, and so that's part of our culture as well. And so I try to just cover a lot of different things there. In the book, also, wherever there was a gap, I added some of my Squatch cartoons in here too, so you'll get a splattering of those as well. So uh, that's really what the book is about, and it's called Arkansas Bigfoot: A Look at the Wild Man in the Natural State. And uh, you can find it on Amazon. It's $20, and but if you want to order it from me and let me sign your copy, just private message me at Robert at arkansasapes.com, and we can make arrangements to get that book to you, uh, and I'll be happy to sign it for you.
Well, that's really cool, and I was very intrigued with it. Being that's my home state, and man, you're right. Arkansas's got a lot of wild areas. People don't really realize that, but it's a beautiful state and a perfect state for these things to be. There's plenty of room.
And that doesn't even include the farmland that's cultivated out there, or pasture lands that nobody lives on. Farmer may visit it once a day or so, but nobody lives out there, and so that's wild land too.
Yeah, it's crazy. I got one more question. I would really like to know your thoughts on this. And do you think these things travel? And I don't like to use family units, but that's the only word that I know that kind of makes sense. But I do know this: if you've seen one, there's generally another one really close by. Why that is, I have no idea. But do you think they travel in packs?
Well, I like that idea of family units, because that's what people have seen several years ago, close to the Little Rock Air Force Base. Early morning, pre-dawn morning, a woman saw two adults and a juvenile cross the road in front of her. Here's an intriguing thing that happened. It was kind of around, I think, in the Ozark area. A guy had a farm up on the hill, and he was driving, and he sees this small thing in the road, and and all of a sudden, here comes a big female out of the woods, and it grabs up that young one, and turns around and runs back to where it was. And he stops his car, and he gets out of it, and he's looking, trying to see if he can see it again. And a rock hits his car in the back, and he turns around, and about 10 foot behind him was a huge male Bigfoot, and he jumped back in his car and he raced up about he said about 100 yards or so, and he stopped and he got out of the car again to look back to see if he could see something, and rocks started hitting his car again. So there was a family group, a mother protecting the young, and then the male protecting both of them. And so, yeah, there are family groups out there, and I and I don't think they migrate to, the ones that are seen out west are not the same ones that are seen here in the south. But I think they move through regionally. Where I live in Valonia, Arkansas, there's several sightings in this area, but I don't think they live here. To the south of us is Lake Conway with a lot of forest around it, plus Camp Robinson, which is a military base that has thousands of acres of untouched land. And so I think they are there. And to the north of us in our county, there's a Cadron Creek that has a lot of forest around. It's a small river, but it has a lot of forest around it too. And so I think they cross through here at Valonia and people see them. Now, I think these things are a primate, and like other big primates, there's usually an alpha male. And when other males get sexually mature, sometimes they're driven out of the group. Uh, and so some of these things, by far the majority of the sightings are of male animals. I think if they were female, somebody would mention the breasts. If it was young, that's mentioned. But these are males about 7 foot tall, and I think maybe they've been driven out and they're looking for a territory of their own or a girlfriend of their own, and they're out of place, and that's why we see them so much. So I do think you're right, though, that if you see one, there could possibly be others, and that one that you see is mainly a male, and so he's probably protecting the other group. Yeah, I would be very fearful about trying to shoot one of these things because there's probably others in the wings.
That's some really good advice, guys. Yeah, don't go out there and try to shoot one of these things, man. That's probably the worst thing that you could do. But that a lot of what you said, Robert, makes sense. And I know you've been in this world for a really long time and had the opportunity to talk to thousands of people and hear all these stories. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and sharing your encounters and then sharing some information about your book, man.
All right. Well, I'm more than happy to. If you ever need me back, fill in a gap, just give me a call. I've got the gift of gab, so.
Well, I definitely will, man. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And guys, I know you enjoyed that episode tonight. That was such a great episode and lots of knowledge there that he has. And go show him some love and check out his book. It takes a lot of work to do this stuff, and he's taken the time out to put all these stories together for you. Arkansas is a very interesting state. I love calling this my home state. But guys, I couldn't do this show without you. I appreciate all the support. If you've got a mystery you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. You know I'm going to say it. It's so very important. Stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode.